So Fallout 76 wasn't really what a lot of people wanted, to put it mildly. It suffered from a great many issues, the most notable of these being the lack of role-playing, dialogue, and story. And I feel like that is the biggest flaw that Fallout 76 has. Bugs can always be patched, features added, and game balance balanced, but you only get one shot at making the game's story. No matter how hard Bethesda may try, you simply can't patch in a story a year after the game has already come out. Which is why Bethesda needs to make sure that they get the story of their next Fallout game right. Bethesda, however, has never really been that good at making stories, as the stories of Fallout 4 and Fallout 3 and even Skyrim and Oblivion have all been little more than simply serviceable. I've never been wowed by a Bethesda story before. But Fallout is a series that was born on good storytelling, harkening back to the days of Fallout 1, which I consider to have the best main story of any Fallout game. So today, I have decided, simply because I'm bored, to outline my ideas for a potential Fallout 5, one that will hopefully bring back some of the storytelling roots of Fallout. So the first and most pressing question is where to actually set our Fallout 5, because in the Fallout games, the setting is everything. Now first, let's eliminate settings that we're not going to use. Now my Fallout 5 will not be revisiting any locations already featured in mainline Fallouts, which means California, Washington DC, Las Vegas, and Boston are out. I'm keeping Chicago and Texas as possibilities, even though they were featured in Tactics and Brotherhood of Steel, because, well, those games weren't that good, and those places still have a lot of potential. I'm also excluding Miami and Washington State as possibilities, since there are already major fan mods in development that feature those locations. Also, I'm going to exclude Philadelphia, simply because it's already so similar to Boston and DC in history, appearance, and atmosphere that it would just result in Fallout 5 feeling like more of the same. So let's go through some good places to stage our story. The first is New York City. Now, New York has a lot of history that would be good to use in Fallout, and the very urban atmosphere of the city would give it a unique feeling compared to the other Fallouts. The biggest downside that I can see is that I'm simply not sure if the creation engine could actually handle the city, given that it could barely handle downtown Boston, and New York would be much denser than that. Another good option would be Detroit. Now, before you go make your hilarious "but Detroit is already a Fallout game, Bethesda wouldn't need to change anything" jokes, I'd like to mention that this would be based on 1950s Detroit, back when it lived up to its name of Motor City. If you wanted drivable cars in Fallout, Detroit would be a pretty good place for it. My final good option would be one that was already thrown around a bit, and that's New Orleans. Now, New Orleans has a lot of potential. Its culture and atmosphere and geography are stuff that we haven't seen before in Fallout, and there's so much potential on what you could do there. However, for the purpose of this video, we can only choose one location, and I have decided to settle with New York City as my ideal setting for Fallout 5, and hopefully you'll begin to agree with me as we proceed through the video. Now that we have our location picked, I think it's time to start talking about the potential story of Fallout 5 New York.
War never changes.
Fallout 5 would begin with narration by Ron Perlman, because it's a Fallout game and it has to be narrated by Ron Perlman. It would hit the major beats: the world consumed by atomic fire, people survived in underground vaults and emerged a century later, yada yada yada. You would start the game in the Empire Wasteland of New York in the year 2282, as a member of Vault 100. Vault 100 was a state-of-the-art facility created by Vault Tech, and was outfitted with 2 Garden of Eden creation kits, a handful of extra water chips, and pretty much whatever it needed times 2. Its opening would be a huge deal for Vault Tech to celebrate their 100th vault, so they had to make it look real good for the press and whatnot. The experiment of Vault 100 was pretty simple. The Overseer had no power at all, pretty much the direct inverse of Vault 101. Now Vault 100, with all its extra supplies, used one of their Geks to reclaim the surface and create a new society, an East Coast Vault City, if you will. This is where the player begins, as a resident of this Vault 100 city. Everything about you, what your job is, your backstory, and whatnot would be entirely up to the player's discretion. The only thing concrete is that you are a citizen of this town, born there and lived there most of your life. The game would immediately begin at night in the rain, with a video of the town guard all screaming in agony as they begin to mutate and deform. Not fully, though. They would only have partial deformation, but would still look rather hideous. The player would then begin in their own small residence where they create their character's appearance and head to a gathering at the town hall, where the mayor of the city is addressing the issue, stating that scientists have linked the mutations to the rain, and that someone from the city must go and figure out what the cause is. The player would then approach a table, where they are required to enter their information to be entered into a raffle, which will determine who gets sent out. This is where you would choose your special stats, skills, and even traits before heading into the gathering and waiting for the drawing. You will also have the option after this of simply volunteering yourself as tribute and agreeing to head out without having to wait for the drawing, but if you don't do that, then your number will inevitably be called and you'll get a meeting with the mayor, who hands you a few basic supplies and sends you off. So before we talk more about the story, let's go over the actual world map of Fallout 5. It would encompass all the boroughs of New York, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, and the Bronx, and also bits of New Jersey. And this would be the world that you are allowed to explore. This would be your Empire Wasteland. Now, it wouldn't be a Fallout game, though, without its fair share of factions. So, this map you're seeing on screen now is an outline of all the factions that will be appearing in Fallout 5, and as we go through the video, we'll go into each of them into more detail. But for now, this should just give you a general idea of the sort of factions that we're going to be dealing with. You'll find out their names, their ideologies, and what they're about as we go through the video. With the mayor's suggestion, the player can head to the town of Utopiana, a settlement formed in the Queen's Botanical Garden by exiles of Vault 100. Utopiana is a member of the Free Cities faction, a confederation of city-states that work together to protect each other's interests and defend each other from invasion, although the cities act autonomously of each other. It includes 6 free cities: Vita's Point, a town located on the abandoned yacht of one Robert Edwin House. In real life, Howard Hughes did actually have a yacht in New York which he called Vita, so I feel like Robert House would probably as well. And I decided to keep the name, hence Vita's Point. There's also Macam, a small, poor settlement located on a rail track. Forest Hills, a wealthy suburban-type community with red roofs on the houses. The Break, a small community located in a single apartment building. And Last Prospect. As for Utopiana, well, contrary to its name, the town is a rusty cesspit, and the people there aren't very helpful. The player can acquire information from the city leader in a number of different ways, by passing a speech check, stealing the information from his safe, threatening him with high strength, or by completing enough quests for the townsfolk that he'll trust you and he'll eventually tell you that the town has experienced the same thing as Vault 100, and he allows you to speak with one of the mutated members of Utopiana. When you arrive at the hospital, you encounter a creature that's hideously deformed, an arm and a leg like a super mutant, an extra hand growing out of his stomach, you name it. The guy basically looks like a human centaur super mutant hybrid. He tells you that he was scavenging around in Brooklyn when he encountered super mutants, and while he was trying to escape back to the nearby town of Last Prospect, he decided to swim through the Prospect Park Lake to get there, which is when he began to feel the horrible mutations, and jumped out of the water and continued on foot. The player then proceeds to continue to the town of Last Prospect in Brooklyn. When you arrive there, you discover that the town is almost barren, with nothing but the few stubborn old-timers still remaining. Most of the people have left the city to get away from the super mutants nearby. They tell you that they remember the man from Utopiana, and are aware of the infected water in the Prospect Park Lake. They also inform you that you aren't the first to ask about the water in the lake. When you go to said lake, you encounter the Brotherhood of Steel already there. A paladin, some knights, and a couple scribes testing the water. They're part of a small team sent by the Brotherhood to scout, but they are pretty much all that exists in the Empire Wasteland at the moment. They stop you and ask your business, and the player can explain that you're also investigating the water, or you can just blow them off and not tell them a goddamn thing. It's all about choice, you know. If you do comply with the Brotherhood, though, then you can tell them about the mutations up in Utopiana and Vault 100, and the Brotherhood will find this fascinating. The Brotherhood Paladin then tells you that what you say lines up with his suspicions, that the water has been infected with the FEV virus. But the information that it spread so far north means the contamination must be in a larger body of water, and you would follow him to the coast where the Brotherhood again test the water and discover the same contamination, meaning the entire New York Bay must have somehow become infected with the FEV virus. At this point, you'd probably get attacked by some crazy FEV fish monster or something like that you'd have to kill. One of the scribes then mentions how they've been examining the New York Bay, and they spot a suspicious-looking ship out there, where the water around it appears green, but he can't tell for sure without getting a closer look, and swimming in FEV-infected water will probably kill you. So, if you tried to make the swim yourself, you would absolutely die. The Brotherhood Paladin would then hatch a plan to get there by boat, but the only faction around that he knows that has a boat is the Urban Rangers. Now, the Urban Rangers are a faction that specializes in scavenging in dangerous locations, especially Manhattan, and are outfitted with excellent armor and weapons, gas masks, and an ample supply of stim packs and rataways, the works. Their flag would be something like a graffiti gas mask. They make a living off of selling valuable salvage to people, and are the only ones equipped enough to scavenge in Manhattan and make it out alive. And they have access to working boats, and there's a group of them over in nearby Greasetown. Greasetown is the largest settlement in the Empire Wasteland, and is famed for their mechanics, so the Rangers often stop there to get their stuff fixed. Greasetown is also the most desired city in the Wasteland, being the only one with any sort of industrial capacity. The Free Cities have been trying for a few years to convince Greasetown to join. The nearby gangs of the Camorra and the Magnae make their fortunes selling illicit items in the city, and the both of them are constantly at war and worried the other will try and take over the city. And the Urban Rangers are trying to protect the city's independence, not for any altruistic reasons, but simply because it's better and cheaper for them since they don't have to deal with any factions. There's also another faction with an interest in the city that is yet to be introduced that will appear later. We'll get to that, though. When you arrive in Greasetown, you'll meet with the representative of the Urban Rangers, and then you'll have a few options about how to acquire the boat. You can convince the Rangers to give it to you freely with a high enough speech skill, but if you mention you're working with the Brotherhood, they'll immediately reject you, and then you'll just have to steal it. Or you can also buy the boat and even reduce the price with a high barter skill, or if you have high enough repair, you can offer to fix up the boat to tip-top shape on the condition that they let you borrow it. You can also join the Urban Rangers faction by completing their initiation quest, which would be to acquire an artifact from Tammany Hall, which is in the middle of Ground Zero, the place where the nuke detonated, and you do that, they'll allow you to use the boat. However you manage to get the boat, you'll sail it back to the Brotherhood, who will board, and you'll go on a nice relaxing cruise ride to an FEV-riddled freighter ship capsized just off the harbor. You and the Paladin would fight your way through FEV creatures until you get to the ship's logs and confirm that, yes, the ship was carrying FEV, but that it also was in communication with the Empire State Building shortly before it was to pull into port on the morning of October 23rd, 2077. The Brotherhood load the barrels of FEV into the boat, thereby stopping the source of active contamination. There is still, however, leftover contaminants infecting the water, so you're not quite out of the ballpark yet. He gives you the task of investigating the Empire State Building to figure out what you can about the strange FEV ship. You can also decide now to just head back to Vault 100, but if you do that, then we'll just chastise you for not actually fixing the problem and tell you to get your ass back out there until the situation is resolved. The player heads to the Empire State Building, which is its own self-contained settlement located entirely within the building. It has entire floors dedicated to residences and others to shopping or some to a hydroponics lab, etc. It was founded by employees of the building who felt it was the safest place in Manhattan to be since it had been reinforced before the bombs fell. It's also the seat of power for the newly established nation of the Empire State, which has come to dominate Midtown Manhattan in just a few years. Its flag would be something like an Empire State Building in front of a half-sun. When you arrive there, you'll find the people happy to help you, but the information you need to access is only found at the top few floors, and that's reserved for the government of the Empire State, and you aren't allowed to go there. There are many ways, however, for you to gain access. You can steal a keycard off of a government employee that will take you to the 97th floor. You can bribe someone to get a keycard. You can make your way up the building through the maintenance shafts and vents, Die Hard style. You can hack the elevator with a high enough skill and take it up. You can complete enough quests for the Empire State that the President will ask to meet with you. Or, alternatively, you can join up with the local Broad Street Gang, a raider gang based out of Broadway, and storm the Empire State Building and kill everyone and force your way to the top. Or you can do the same thing but solo if you're some kind of John Wick motherfucker. Either way, no matter how you do it, when you finally reach the 97th floor, the same thing happens. You are confronted by the President of the Empire State, who reveals himself actually to be the Enclave. You see, a group of Enclave fled the capital wasteland shortly after the death of Colonel Autumn, and defected, being disillusioned with the ideals of the Enclave. They arrived in the Empire wasteland and went straight to the Empire State Building, which before the war was a communications hub for Enclave activities, and using their government IDs were able to access the floors which had been closed off to the residents of the Empire State. Seeing them as the federal government returning to lead them, the Enclave officer in charge was elected as president of the Empire State, and he founded the Empire State as its own faction and expanded quickly using the superior Enclave technology to include the nearby settlements of Crossroads, which is a small trading hub in Times Square. They also occupied the bridges leading into Manhattan and the port, which ferries people across from Hamilton Park, and just recently occupied Grand Central Station, the former headquarters of the Urban Rangers. But with the Brotherhood of Steel arriving in the Empire Wasteland, they decided to lay low and recalled all Enclave personnel to the Empire State Building. The people of the Empire State are unaware of the crimes the Enclave has committed. The player is then given the choice of working for the Enclave. That offer is also reluctantly extended to the Broad Street Gang if you chose to attack with them, or getting the hell out. If you refuse, the President will express shame, but still allow you to get the information and will offer you a short period of time to change your mind, or you can join up right then and there and run jobs for the Enclave, which would be one of the major factions in the endgame, and eventually you'll even be able to join as a full-on member. Or you can also report their existence to the Brotherhood of Steel and then attack with the Brotherhood forces and eliminate the Enclave once and for all. Or you can convince the Empire State of the atrocities the Enclave has committed and get them to rise up and cast off the Enclave, resulting in the Empire State becoming more like the NCR. The Enclave, however, is not as evil as in Fallout 2 and 3. They've acknowledged their wrongdoings and have accepted the people of the Wasteland as American citizens who should be protected, but they are still just a tad bit racist and utterly intolerant of ghouls, super mutants, and the like. But they have decided to just not genocide everyone this time around because the last 2 times they tried it didn't exactly work, which I suppose makes them just a tad bit better than they were before. In fact, Enclave Land is actually very safe and almost completely devoid of mutants, although there are a few pesky raiders who have appeared since the Enclave went dark. No matter how you deal with the Enclave, you discover from the Empire State Building's records that the FEV freighter was part of the experiments at Vault 87 and the Mariposa military base, and was to carry the FEV virus into New York Harbor. But the Great War happened just before it pulled into port. It would have been involved with an experiment where the US government would abduct select immigrants from Ellis Island and use them to test the FEV virus. By select, I mean anybody the government would consider undesirable, mostly those with Chinese or otherwise communist connections. This was to be a sort of field test for the FEV virus to study its effects, with Vault 87 serving only as a backup in case nuclear Armageddon happened first. The terminal reveals the existence of a secret vault beneath Ellis Island, one that's not numbered and unknown to the general public. If you're thinking, well, people would surely notice something like this, people going missing and all, to that I say that's part of the vetting process, the government only taking people who wouldn't be missed. And the vault is soundproof and airtight, so no one would hear a thing. Terminal would also mention that similar experiments were going on in other parts of the country, in the South and Midwest and the West Coast and the like, so there's a little lore justification there for Bethesda if they want to have super mutants in other parts of the country. The player then returns to the Brotherhood, where the Paladin will say how he truly wishes that he could help more, but that the Brotherhood is simply not in a strong enough position to help and he has his orders, and the Capital Wasteland won't send any reinforcements to help at the moment. He advises you to speak to one of the other factions that you've met to see if they can help you more. The Brotherhood will be returning to the Capital Wasteland soon, but they'll be sticking around for the time being. He then offers the player the option to become a Brotherhood initiate, and you can refuse. Accepting will allow you to continue running quests for the Brotherhood, but you can accept at any time, even if you initially refuse. Here's now a timeline overview of Act 1. From this point, we enter Act 2 of the story, and depending on the factions you're affiliated with, you can have 3 possible paths that begin from here on out. The Enclave side will require you to first eliminate the Brotherhood, so that the Enclave can continue their activities unimpeded. Although you don't actually have to kill the Brotherhood, you can just convince them to return earlier than they anticipated. The Enclave would then ask you to secure a power armor factory up in the Bronx. Doing so would require you to fight through the Throgs, a tribal society that has conquered much of the Bronx, but despite being tribal, have in fact used the power armor factory to manufacture a bit of power armor of their own. And you would have to fight them to secure the factory, but doing so will allow you to manufacture your own power armor from scratch once it's restored. If you killed or exposed the Enclave and let the Empire State instead go its own way, then you'd speak to the president of the newly proclaimed Manhattan Republic, and the first thing they'd have you do is deal with the Shogunate, a nearby faction led out of Shogun's Hall that's been a thorn in the Empire State's side. They're based out of the old Japan Society building, and they're led by a shogun at the head of it, and the shogun's 3 daimyos, which answer to him. They act sort of like raiders, but they're not immediately hostile to the player once they enter the shogun's hall, and you can speak with the shogun and attempt to make peace, or even convince them to join the Republic with a very high speech. Or, you can kill the shogun. Both will resolve the issue. After that, the story continues the same as if it were the Enclave, having you take the power armor factory. The Urban Ranger's path would have you recover some DIA device from Ground Zero, although when you find where it's supposed to be, you also find a ghoul from the nearby town of Cittadina also trying to get it. Cittadina is a town inhabited by a bunch of Italian ghouls in the ruins of Little Italy, and since they're ghouls, they sometimes scavenge in Ground Zero because it doesn't bother them like it does normal people. Now, you can kill them, bother with them, persuade them to let you have it, or use science to convince them that you need it more, or you could just steal it anyway. After you bring it back to the colonel of the Rangers, he would have you join the Rangers on an offensive mission to retake Grand Central Station from the Empire State. You would go through the subways until you get there and launch an attack on the station, killing all of them. As long as you don't leave any witnesses, the Empire State will have no idea you were involved, and you can still be friendly with them for the time being. If you go down the Free Cities path, you'd meet them at the Diet of Forest Hills, and they'd tell you that in exchange for their help, they want you to help defend Vita's Point against the attacking Throgs, which the player would then do. After Vita's Point is safe, they'd ask you to go find one of their caravans carrying sensitive stuff that was lost in Staten Island. And when you arrive there, you find that the caravan was attacked by the nearby raider gang known as the Fade, and they've captured the caravaneers hoping for a ransom. You can head to Stockton, the former Staten Island prison, which now serves as the headquarters for the Fade, and negotiate their release. You can pay the ransom or pull off a stealthy, daring rescue mission. Or you can just shoot them all in the face and rescue them that way. If you don't kill the Fade, though, you can eventually come back and ask to join them, and they'll have a few quests for you to do that will decide their future. Even if you don't go down the Free Cities path, you can still join the Fade by going there yourself. Despite which side you chose for Act 2, all of them will want the same things in the end. The first is to acquire a Garden of Eden creation kit from Vault 100. Such a thing would surely give them an edge over the other factions, and this is really the deciding point. And technically, you could have done all the previous quests and played all 3 sides before this, but at this point, whichever faction you choose to bring the Gek to is the faction that you'll officially choose. After you acquire one from the vault through whichever way it takes to get it, the faction in question will have you take over Greasetown, albeit differently depending on which faction. The Enclave would have you conquer them, the Manhattan Republic would have you either conquer them or convince them to accept peaceful annexation if you have high enough speech. The Urban Rangers will occupy the city and officially declare that they will defend Greasetown independence, and the Free Cities will have you convince the city leadership that it's in their best interest to join up. Either way, whichever faction you gave the Gek to will, with your help, take control of Greasetown, and now that you've helped said faction, the faction is willing to help you in return, and find how to deal with the FEV. Here's a timeline overview for Act 2. Now it's around this very moment that all of New York finds itself at risk, as a faction which had, until this point, vowed to stay out of New York affairs, breaks that promise and occupies the nearby nuclear power plant in Bayonne. That faction is the Commune of the International Proletariat, shortened as the Commentariat. And they are a faction of communists. They were founded by a poor farmer who stumbled upon a cache of pro-communist propaganda one day and became somewhat inspired to restart the communist revolution, believing it to be the only way that the world can rebuild, is if people help each other. And he begins carving out his communist empire over in northern Pennsylvania, and now has his sights set on New York. Their flag would be a red flag with a yellow scythe and a communist star on it. The General Secretary, which is the name given to the head of state of the Commentariat, believes that all workers, even those outside of the Commentariat borders, are naturally members of the Commentariat, hence the name Commune of the International Proletariat. Their ideology is somewhat a mix of Stalinist and Maoist communism. Throughout the game thus far, the player would have already heard of the Commentariat through other NPCs talking about it. The player is then sent to investigate the commentariat activity and is surprisingly granted an audience with the General Secretary as well as the Marshal of the Commentariat, who speaks with you because he's been monitoring your progress the whole time. Throughout the whole game, you would have encountered communist spies and never known it, and as such, they already know a great deal about you, including your ability to get results. The communists then explain how the forced evolutionary virus that infected New York was caused by their spies, who found the tanker and caused an explosion that would infect the harbor with the virus, to both destabilize the other factions of New York and allow them to see the effects of the virus firsthand. The Commentariat would then extend you a one-time offer to join them, and if you refuse, the Commentariat throw you into one of their gulags. Except, lucky for you, you arrived just as the prisoners of the gulag were planning a riot to escape. Lucky you. You take part in the planning, stealing weapons, and taking part in the riots to escape the gulags. You get your stuff back and then return to the faction that you sided with. There's two ways to proceed from here. Either destroy the other two factions to ensure that they don't try to take advantage of the situation, or you can convince them to meet at the former United Nations headquarters, which has become the headquarters of a toy company once it disbanded. But it still works as neutral ground between all the factions to meet and make peace and ally against the Commentariat. If you have high enough speech, you can get through the negotiations without having to make concessions. Otherwise, you'd probably have to. After you do one of those two options, your faction will attack the communists at the Bayonne nuclear power plant, alone if you destroy the other factions, or altogether if you made peace. And you'll take over the power plant and kill the Marshal, but find the General Secretary nowhere to be found. Logs on his terminal at the plant reveal that he's gone to a secret vault at Ellis Island. Now, if you tried to go to the vault before this moment, you would find it locked, and you would be unable to get inside. But now when you go there, you would find the General Secretary has opened the vault and he's inside. After fighting through communists and FEV monsters, you would confront him inside. You can tell him that you took the power plant and killed his marshal, but he doesn't seem the least bit fazed by it, because he believes he'll just take it right back now that he has access to the ability to build an army. Inside the vault is a large stockpile of the forced evolutionary virus that he intends to use to create a super mutant army that would greatly allow him the ability to expand the Commentariat. The only problem is getting the super mutants to listen to him, but for the greater good of the revolution, he is willing to make certain sacrifices. Now at this point, if you have max speech, you can convince him that his plan is doomed to fail by mentioning the fate of other communist regimes and stuff and convince him to simply surrender. If you had max hacking, you could have hacked into the vault's mainframe before confronting him and activated the vault's self-destruct system. Otherwise, the General Secretary will inject himself with a special serum of the FEV, which will turn him into a monster that you'll have to fight. After dealing with the General Secretary, you explore the vault and find that the experiments there did lead to results, one of which was a potential cure for the FEV virus. There's not a large amount, but you bring it back to your faction of choice. They don't have the scientific prowess to make more, but they're grateful for what you've brought and express how they intend to use the Gek you acquired for them to restore the nuclear reactor in Bayonne. The player returns to Vault 100 with some samples of the FEV cure, and using their science lab, they begin to make more of them. They express how it will take decades possibly to fully cure New York of the FEV virus, but that the process will begin immediately. Then they give you little more than a pat on the back for all that you did. Congratulations. And that is the end of the story, if you don't side with the Commentariat. But that is an option, so let's rewind a bit and assume that's what you did. If the player sides with the Commentariat, then instead you will destroy all the major factions in New York, the Empire State, the Urban Rangers, and the Free Cities, retrieve the Gek from whichever one you gave it to, and use it to restore the nuclear reactor. Now at this point you also have another option, if you're a particular piece of shit, and that's to overload the Gek and cause the reactor to explode, and it'll basically create a worse version of the Chernobyl disaster, especially since nobody would be around to clean it up, and you essentially doom all of New York to die to horrible radiation poisoning. You absolute monster. But that is an option. If you actually work with the Commentariat, though, they restore the reactor, and the player goes to the Ellis Island Vault, where the General Secretary has you turned into a super mutant to become a major part of his army. So, here's the timeline overview for Act 3. No matter which side you pick, you get an ending slideshow like in the previous Fallouts, and then that's it. The game ends. It doesn't continue like in Fallout 4, it definitively ends. Here's an overview of the 10 possible endings, as well as what each of them means for the fate of Vault 100 in the end. So, that's the story of Fallout 5, at least what I came up with. I had a lot of fun brainstorming ideas for it, but And at the end of the day, that's all this is just a session in brainstorming. I'm not saying this is the greatest Fallout 5 that could ever exist, it's just what I came up with at the moment. I'm more than interested to see what people could do with this. If you can feel free to expand upon it, offer your own ideas in the comment section below. I've never written for a video game before, or really written anything before, so you'll have to take that into consideration. But I do hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully this gets you at least somewhat hyped for Fallout 5 so that Bethesda can inevitably shatter your dreams when it doesn't live up to your expectations. And then let me know if you'd be interested in seeing more videos like this in the future. I wouldn't mind making more Fallout 5 ideas based on the cities that I haven't used for this video, and even making a follow-up to this one talking more in depth about the factions and some of the locations that didn't get brought up that you may have seen on the map. Anyways, let me know. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe because it's free to do so and it would really make my day. And take care. Goodbye.